Okay, so here we are in Animate CC. So basically I'm just going to show you guys how to create a simple animation. We'll look at some of the features in the work area here and so on in terms of how to do a simple animation. All right, so what I will do first is I'm going to go ahead and change my workspace area to classic. I'll make this double column. And we're going to go ahead and start with ActionScript 3.0 in terms of the setup for Animate. As I said before, this used to be Flash, and so we're going to continue again with ActionScript 3.0. Remember, you can move if you need to the different windows to different areas if you want, but we'll go ahead and keep it in the same spot. And it's up to you in terms of where you want to move it, or if you want to keep your toolbar on the left, right, or whatever. All right, so here we have our timeline. This is called the stage, our toolbar, and basically the different windows which you can access. If you don't see a window that you don't see on here, just go up to the menu window and look for that particular window. Okay. Again, a lot like many other Adobe products. So we're going to start with the rectangle tool. So if you click and drag, in terms of just creating an object there, you'll be creating the rectangle tool. And the default right now is for it to have a fill color of blue and no stroke. Notice that there's no stroke on here. But this lets us at least learn a little bit in terms of how to move and work with an object. So if I use my selection tool, you can use this as a cutting tool. Just click and drag half of this. For instance, notice half is selected and I can just press delete. Or, I just did Command Z by the way, I can click and drag and move it and cut it out from there if I want to use part of that. Or I can make another part of it as a whole part. So now it becomes one object. So again, I can take two different objects as long as they don't have a stroke, and then move them together and they become one object, right? Now if they have a stroke, that's a different story. So now I'm going to go ahead and put a stroke on an object. So now I'll click and drag. This, if you'll notice, has a stroke on there. I'll go ahead and zoom in. So you see here's a fill and there's a stroke, right? All right, so now if you'll notice, I'll create another circle which has a blue fill using my selection tool. Shortcut is the letter V as in Victor. Now that I double click on it, if I double click, you'll notice I'm also selecting the stroke. If I don't double click, I'm only selecting the fill. So I'm double clicking to select the stroke and the fill. Now click and drag and I've cut a hole through that fill as you can see on the rectangle. So again, these are different ways that we can edit our objects if we need to. So, all right. So basically, in terms of working with it, in terms of cutting through it, adding to it, that's, you have to keep that in mind in terms of using a stroke or if you decide to put a stroke on an object or not. Okay. All right. So basically, in terms of drawing something, we'll go ahead and draw a boat, and I'm going to change the color here. Not going to have a stroke on there. So start with. So I'll start with a rectangle. And we're going to have this boat move across from one side to the other. All right. So I'm using my selection tool to kind of modify this rectangle. I'm just clicking on the corner point. As you can see, if you worked on Illustrator, you can basically just click and drag these corner points, just like if you were working on Illustrator. Basically, there are anchor points that are in these corners. Then I'll go ahead and continue with a rectangle tool, and I'm going to draw the mass. I can hold down, if I'm still working on the rectangle tool, I can hold down the command key, and then it converts to a move tool. So I can move this around. Or now notice, because they're the same color, it became one object. All right, so now I want to change, I want to put a sail on here. So, before I do that, let's go ahead and change the background. So I'm going to click on the stage, making sure I'm not selecting anything else. So again, command key becomes the selection tool. By clicking on the stage, now I can see the property of the stage. So in this case, we want to make sure that, hold on a second. Okay, so I'm going to click on the, again, making sure I've clicked on the stage. And I'm going to click on the stage color, pick up the stage color. So I'm going to select light blue. As my background color. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and use the rectangle tool and change it to white. Now I'm going to click make a rectangle here for my sail. And I'm changing over to my selection tool, but I'm going to make this into a triangle by just clicking and dragging the corner and moving it down. Now I have a triangle. So I'm going to take this triangle, and I'm going to hold on the option key, command option key, click and drag it, makes a copy of it. Okay. And now I'm going to flip it. So I'm going to go to modify on the menu, arrange, and flip horizontally. And now I have my sail. All right. So I want to move this from one side to the other. So I'm going to select it, and I'm going to make it all into one object. So I'm going to bound this one object. So right now it's a vector shape. You see, I can modify it, in terms of, just moving different different points, anchor points of it. So I'm going to select it, and I'm going to convert it to either a symbol or it's going to be a symbol. It's going to be either a graphic symbol, a button, or a movie clip. All right. So I could right mouse click on it, or I can go up to modify, convert to symbol, or hit F8. And automatically comes up to movie clip. I know that for now, I just want to move this back and forth. So a very simple object. I don't need to be a complicated movie clip object. So I'm going to go ahead and select graphic. I'm going to change this. And it's important to change it from, if it's just the default, because then you won't be able to identify it right away. So I'm just going to change it to boat. So it's a good habit to get into, to making sure to name your symbols. So now you'll notice there's a bounding box around it. Okay, so if I go into library, by the way, so I can see that there is a boat symbol. And here is a preview of that boat, and obviously you can see it here. So on the library, it's a symbol. On stage is an instance, and I can create several of these, but that doesn't mean that now my file is, I can click and drag 10 of these if I wanted to. Again, it doesn't mean that the file is 10 times bigger. It's just an instance of that. So it's linked to this right here. So any changes I make to the boat symbol, it will also change any other instances that I have here. So if I have 10 instances and make a change to that boat symbol, all those 10 boats would be changed also. Okay. All right, I'm going to go ahead and change the size of this particular instance, but that won't change the size on the symbol. Okay. So what I want to do is have this boat move across, and so I'm going to create an ocean. So now that I have the boat here in this layer, so I'm in my timeline, here's my layer. I'm going to double click, change it to boat. I'm going to create a new layer by clicking here. And I'm going to change that to ocean. So I will create an ocean, dark deep blue color. Just move it around a little bit. All right, so, but I want to, in the ocean, I want to create some peaks, or some waves. So basically, I'm going to start by clicking and dragging this down just a bit so I can so I'm creating a curve segment here instead of a straight line segment. If I don't do this, what I want to do is create curves by holding down the Option key and clicking and dragging. Notice what happens here. I have straight line segments. But by clicking and dragging down just a bit, and holding down the Option key, I will click on that line segment, and I'll click and drag, and now I have a curve and an anchor point. Curve, anchor point, curve, and so on. Okay, and I can modify this if I want to. And so on. And I can add to it. All right, so there's my ocean right now. Now, the other thing I want to do is create another layer, and then we'll just to kind of fill in the background. So we'll do some clouds, and I'm going to use this time my oval tool, change the color to white, and then use that feature where we can combine two objects without a stroke, and it becomes one object. Okay, so there's our clouds. And then we'll put a bird in here. We could do it several different ways. Use the line tool, or we can use a pencil tool. I'll use the line tool, change the properties on there. I'm going to change the stroke, make it a little bit bigger. Let's see here. Oop. Change that to white. Ooh, too big. Stroke color white. Okay, so a couple of birds, or yeah, enough. Or 3 birds. We'll do 3 birds. And I can modify it if I need to. Make them smaller, bigger, whatever. And I'm using, in this particular, I'm using the sub-selection tool. So I can see my anchor points, and I can click and make them smaller or larger or whatever it is you want to do with it. Again, so I can just grab those particular anchor points. So using the sub-selection tool. Okay, so that's pretty much my setup right now in terms of my background, the boat, and so on. So remember, in order to animate it, I needed to first convert it to a symbol. So either a graphic symbol or a movie clip symbol before I go ahead and be able to move it from one end to the other. So I'm just going to basically move it over here. So now I'm going to select the keyframe. There's that little black dot means there's a keyframe there. So I'm going to select the keyframe on these. These are all individual frames. Notice it's marked up to 1 second. Right now it's 24 frames per second. You'll notice right here it tells us it's at 24 frames per second. So I'm going to right mouse click on here and then select Create Motion Tween. And you'll notice it tweens it out all the way to frame 24. But you'll also notice everything else is gone. This right here is called a playhead. So when I click and drag on the playhead, anything that this line goes through, so right here, for instance, in this particular frame, we're on frame 22 right now, that's where my boat is. And that boat is on all these particular frames. Everything else is all on frame 1. Notice that red line goes all the way through down to the bottom. And so everything that, something only needs to exist on one frame. As long as that playhead is there, it will show it up on stage. Of course, if it's 24 frames per second, so then when we play it, it just disappears very quickly. So what we want to do is make sure we draw this out. We're not going to animate some of this stuff yet, but what we're going to do is just draw it out. So I'm going to select, in this case, we'll go ahead and let it play for 1 second. But before we do that, notice nothing is moving. But again, I want to make sure I draw this all out. So I'm going to select frame, in this case, frame 24. Then, I could. Well, actually, let's see. Yeah, we'll just go ahead and insert frames in here. So I'm going to hit F5, and it just draws out the frames all the way to frame 24. Now I could go through it just one by one, hit F5 on the keyboard, and it will draw it out. Or I'm going to undo this. I just could select from top to bottom. So I'm going to go ahead and select frame 1 right here, or frame 24 on the bird. I'm going to go ahead and hold on the shift key. So I'm clicking down on the clouds frame or layer, and also on the ocean layer. So now all I have to do is insert frames or hit F5. So now these are static. Notice the different colors. This is gray. There's no keyframe at the end. There's no keyframe here either because we haven't animated it yet. Okay. So now if I move my playhead back and forth, you notice everything just sits there, right? When we play it out, it'll sit there for 1 second. So now I'll go ahead and animate. So again, I'll move my playhead. So remember, starting frame 1, there's a keyframe right there. So I have to decide where, how long I want this to play for, or if I want any changes in between. I'm deciding right now that I want this boat to end up here within 1 second. So that means that I'll move my playhead all the way to the end. In this case, I'll click and drag my boat to the other side. And notice now it creates a keyframe. You see the little diamond right there. And then I'll go back to frame 1, and you'll notice already it just went backwards, but again, back in frame 1, which is a starting frame, move my playhead to frame 24, and you'll notice again it's animated. Now it's animating in a straight line. Now to test this out, or to see it as a Swift file, which is the type of file that you would upload, for instance, to some kind of device or the internet, I'm going to go ahead and hit command or press Command Return or Enter or Control Enter on a PC, and then we can see this playing out. Notice again, everything's in the background, just static, but my boat is moving across. And the reason it keeps looping is because what it's doing is starting on frame 1 on the right, and then playing to frame 24, and then the playhead is going back to frame 1 and just looping. By the way, later on we'll learn how to control all this. Okay, but for now we'll just notice again it's titled untitled. We haven't titled it, so .swift. So this is a Swift file, and this right here is a Flash file. So let's go ahead and save this. So I'm going to go File, Save. It'll come up. I'm just going to go ahead and put this on the desktop for now. We'll name it Boat. And notice it'll save with .fla, so Flash file. Okay. And then now if I test it out one more time, it'll be boat.swf. And if we look in the desktop, I'm going to hide this real quick. you'll notice that we have the flash file, and then we have the boat file. Okay. All right. So now I want to modify this a little bit. Now there's a couple of ways we can modify this in terms of as it comes across, the animation. I just want to move it up and down sort of accordingly to the way. We're going to learn a more intricate way of doing this eventually. We're going to draw the path out and have it follow the motion path. Now this is considered a motion path where we can draw our own motion path. So Animate created its own motion path for us that we can modify. What we can do, for instance, let me just show you one way, which I don't recommend doing it this way, but basically you're just kind of moving the, slightly moving, again, selecting the motion path, and then you can move this. If you just move the object just a little bit, then you'll notice I can click and drag. But the problem here is that it's very, it's kind of hard to really modify it the way you want to. So notice there's these little curves here, there's these little peaks, steep angles, and it kind of, when you try to modify the way you want to kind of like follow this, it doesn't quite do it that way. So you can't do it that way, right? So I'm going to undo all this. For now, what I would recommend is that you just move the playhead about where you think you want to move, you want to make the object go up or down, and then just select it. Now it will put a keyframe there, which is fine. As long as you don't have too many keyframes, it won't matter too much. So then I'll just move it down a little bit, up a little. Again, this is not also the best way, but you can control it a little bit better. Okay? So now if I test it out, it moves across. All right, so we left this at 1 second, but say that you're thinking, oh, I want this to last for 2 seconds. So what I could do is or 2 seconds or more, is in terms of the tween itself, all I have to do is just put my cursor at the end of my tween, click and drag to the 2 second mark. And notice it spaces out our keyframes all evenly, or in terms of as even as you can get it with whatever number of keyframes you put on there. But again, you'll notice it didn't draw out everything. But as you know, now all you have to do is hold on the Shift key, select each of those frames that you want to extend it out to, hit F5 or insert frame. And then it draws it all out. And so now it'll last for 2 seconds instead of 1 second. Okay? And basically, that's how you're going to animate. You're going to create an object and, whatever it is, background, and then animate your object through that background. Okay?